Okay, so next we have Jennifer Smith, attorney with SledgeLaw Group, and she'll be talking about personnel and employment policies for GCDs. Let's welcome her.
Hello. Let me grab this little thing. And you should be. Can it go sideways? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep, that's me. Okay. Well, thank y'all for being here today. I'm really glad to provide you with what I hope is a pleasant and yet useful diversion from groundwater, because most of what I'm talking about will apply to pretty much any business in the state of Texas, government or otherwise. And as I was thinking about a title that would be engaging to everyone and something that everyone could identify with, I thought, oh, The Office, the TV show, which I hope most of you are fans of because it's awesome. But anyway, even if you're not a fan of the show, most people know the crazy characters and the hijinks that they have going on in that environment. So when I thought of, is your office The Office, that's not a compliment. If your answer is yes, then that's not a good thing. So what I'm going to try to do today is just give a quick overview of some principles and some things that you can think about as you put together a personnel policy for your district or your business, and hopefully will keep you from getting into a bad situation. So I thought we would start with a quote from the boss who always knows exactly the wrong thing to say at the wrong time. So Michael Scott says, "I knew exactly what to do, but in a much more real sense, I had no idea what to do." So has anyone ever felt that way? That would be me, and when it comes to personnel issues, that's often the case. So what we're going to talk about today are just some things that I think you should include in your policy, and there's such a myriad of things, we won't go over all of them, but just a few essentials. And just to give you a highlight of what the complaint process looks like, if there is a complaint filed with the Texas Workforce Commission. So hopefully this will prevent you from ending up like Michael here. So what my next slide is just what I call the office does. And these are things that I feel like, duh, like you need to have a policy, you should implement the policy, and you should update the policy. So let me just ask real quick, who has an employment or personnel policy in their office that they're aware of? Okay. How many of you have actually looked at that policy in the last couple of years? Okay, a fewer number. So it's usually one of those things you get and you put on the shelf and you don't look at again. But if you're in any kind of management role, I highly recommend that you start developing a policy if you don't have one, and then if you have one and it hadn't been looked at in a while, get it out, brush off the dust, and because it's going to need some updates. The laws change, and you're going to need to know what's current. And you really do need to have a policy for your employees' sake. These people come and spend most of their day with you doing the work of the district or whoever. And so they need to know what their rights are as an employee. And you need to know, what their rights are and what your responsibilities are as an employer. So definitely have a policy. And one thing I would say is if you're starting to develop a policy and maybe you're kind of looking at what other people are doing and you're taking bits and pieces, that's fine, but just make sure that your policy matches your culture. And that's why I have, ask, what is my office culture? And can the management support these policies across the board? So there are going to be really big districts that, they're going to need a little bit more detail and more structure in their policy. Some of the smaller districts, you may not need that. And so don't put something in your policy that you have no plans of implementing. You never want to be in a situation where you're on a witness stand someday trying to defend your policy and some attorney asks you to read it out loud and you're like, oh, I've never seen this before. you don't want that to happen. So make sure that you're really thinking about, well, what do we need in our culture? Maybe we don't need a whole lot of things. There's some basics you will need to have, but not everything. So just think about that. This is just a thing that you don't want to wing it, you know. So like Michael Scott often wings it, and it never turns out right. So let's have a plan and a policy in place. Okay, a couple of things that I feel like your policy really should include at a minimum is a statement of at-will employment. Texas is an at-will employment state. And so basically this just means that it works both ways. An employee can quit for any reason. They don't really owe you their servitude. And you as the employer can fire, transfer, demote for any reason, as long as it's not for an illegal reason, okay? So you want to make that clear in your policy, and also let them know this policy is not a contract of employment. So I would actually have a statement that says, you know, nothing in this policy alters the at-will statement, okay? And then you want to have them sign it. So the last page of your employment policy should always have a employee acknowledgement. Have them sign it, keep it in their personnel file, because you know they're basically acknowledging, yes, I've read this and I understand it and I'm good with it. Okay, so those are some things I want to just recommend that you definitely have. And then this is just another, you know, I have cause, it is because I hate him. So I don't know who he was talking about there, but probably he's wanting to fire someone and he's saying, I have cause because I hate this guy, you know. So in Texas, you can kind of fire somebody if you hate them, as long as you don't hate them for an illegal reason, okay? So that's just, you know, what that is. Okay, so I wanted to talk about just a couple of areas that, 4 different areas that get people in the most trouble or cause confusion. The first one is the discrimination laws. So Title VII and the Texas law also prohibit discrimination. And that's basically just unfair treatment on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, gender, national origin, age, disability, or genetic information. So can't treat anybody unfairly on the basis of any of those factors. Also, harassment on the basis of any of those things is a violation of the law. Denial of a reasonable workplace accommodation. So, like for instance, a religious accommodation, or someone who has a disability. You must accommodate, you can't discriminate. And then retaliation is also discrimination. So that's like, you know, if someone files a complaint of discrimination or some kind of complaint in the office place, you may not retaliate against them for doing that. That is a violation of the law. Okay, so I wanted to give you just a couple of examples. Religion, for example. You can't, the bottom line is you can't discriminate and you must accommodate. Okay, so unless it's a undue hardship on the business, you need to figure out a way to accommodate people who have some kind of religious observance that they need to take care of. That could be like a schedule change to observe a holiday, or it could be, you know, a dress or a grooming practice that is different, and so you need to try to help them to accommodate that. So there was a case in California where this woman worked for Abercrombie and Fitch. And I don't know if y'all know, but you know, they're kind of known for their racy ads and real provocative and everything. And so this woman was a Muslim woman. She wore a headscarf. Well, they told her, okay, you can wear the headscarf, but it's got to be in our brand colors, whatever that was. So I was like, okay. And so she obliged that. Well, then a little bit later, they said, actually, you know, that headscarf doesn't fit in with our look policy. So actually, I guess you have to, you know, look a certain way to work at Abercrombie. And they said, so the headscarf's got to go, or you go. And she said, well, I'm not taking it off. So they fired her. Well, that did not go so well for them. You can't do that. And so in that kind of situation, you got to think about, all right, how can we make this work? Now, for GCDs, I don't know if y'all all have a look policy for your GCD that you're trying to promote this certain cool, suave, hipster, whatever it is, But a more realistic situation for you all might be, an employee who, because of their religious observances, maybe they get 3 more days off than other employees. Well, think about how you're going to handle that if that kind of situation arises, to where you can accommodate them, but it's not unfair, unduly burdensome on your other employees. Okay. Okay. So the next one is discrimination based on sex, and that's in treating an employee differently because they're male or female. That includes pregnancy or stereotypes and assumptions based on sex. Okay, so that's the bottom line, and I mean, most of y'all know, you can't pay somebody that's doing the same job differently, okay, depending on their sex. Now, the sexual harassment piece of this, I felt like we should spend more time on because, frankly, we don't hear enough about that these days. It's, it's not in the news very much or anything. So I felt like we really needed to touch on that. That can be unwelcome advances, requests for sexual favors, verbal or physical harassment of any type. Okay, so I guess I want you to think about this as we talk about it. Do you ever want your business name or your district's name to be associated with a, Me Too hashtag somewhere online? Just, always kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And, it's just one of those things where you don't want to have a paranoid environment at all in your workplace. But you just have to know that this is the world we live in, okay? So everyone needs to be aware of this policy. The sexual harassment can take a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to grab you, It can be a lot more subtle than that. And so you just need to be aware of any kind of behavior that sets an inappropriate tone or an uncomfortable tone for people. One of the things I was thinking about was, and by the way, this applies not only to people who are your employees, but anybody who's in your office, okay? So if you have vendors coming in or other types of people that come in and frequent your office place, board members that come in, as Steve was just talking about, it's not that they can't be around, but they need to be aware of the policy and abide by it. And so, anyway, what I was going to say was that if you have some people that are creating that type of environment, you've got to nip it in the bud. I mean, it's your responsibility to do that before something goes wrong. I used to work with a guy, and everybody called him the office masseuse, even though that wasn't what he was hired to do. But he kind of just took that on as the extra role. And I really don't believe he had any bad intentions. But he would just come up to you and just start, like, rubbing your shoulders. And for me, it wasn't so much offensive as it was just, like, frightening, because he would just, like, start doing it, And so if you have somebody like that that's either, overly touchy or the jokester or the flirt, that people just kind of tolerate, oh, that's, John, he just says stuff like that. Well, it only takes one person to find that really offensive, and then you've got a problem. So you kind of just have to err on the side of caution, and if you've got folks like that, they may not have any ill intention at all, but you got to sit them down and say, you can't do that. anymore, okay? Because they're putting you in jeopardy by doing that. So just a couple of final thoughts on that is prevention is key, and by having sexual harassment policy in your personnel policy is a good start, and just have dialogues about it. Be really open with your employees about, this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated. And also, I would recommend that you have a very small number of people that can actually receive sexual harassment complaints. You may not need to have that for any other type of complaint, but this is, a kind of unique situation. And so you might want to just have you, if you're the general manager, or just one or two other people who know how to handle those complaints. Because the last thing you want is somebody goes and makes a complaint and, a manager has no idea what to do, or they go and do totally the wrong thing, and they go and tell the person who's accused, so-and-so just came to my office, that kind of thing. So just think about who would those people be in your environment. You always want to make the complaint process as easy as possible in this situation. And I know that sounds weird because, you don't want to invite complaints, but you want to make sure people know they're not going to have a lot of obstacles if they complain, okay? Okay, let's see. This is just an example of what you would not want anyone to say. I love the smell of bacon on a woman, okay? Okay. Sorry, if y'all don't watch The Office, you're probably just like, what is she talking about? I think it's hysterical. Okay, so the next topic is not that enticing, wage and hour laws. So under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you're required to pay a certain type of employee overtime pay if they work overtime. And those would be what are called non-exempt employees. These are folks who would work a 40-hour week on a salary basis. And so they are not exempt from this overtime pay, okay? Your exempt employees are those who work whatever the job requires, whatever hours are required, and they're paid a salary, and that's their salary no matter how many hours they work, okay? So you don't pay them overtime. And usually the distinction, and there's a lot more involved in this, but it kind of boils down to how much independent authority does this person exercise. So if you've got an employee that really only does what someone tells them to do, they're most likely going to be non-exempt. Exempt employees have a little more discretion and, independent judgment. But as an employer, as you're hiring people, and if you've already have a staff and you haven't gone through this process, you need to think about, what types of employees you have. And as much as you might want someone to be exempt because you don't want to have to pay overtime, like you can't fudge on this. If depending on their role, you got to classify them the way they're supposed to be classified. Now, there was a couple of years ago, the Department of Labor recommended raising the salary level for the minimum salary level for exempt employees to $47,000. It's currently like $24,000, okay? Well, when they did that, a lot of employers started freaking out because now they're going to have to pay a ton more people overtime that they had not previously had to pay. So that faced a lot of legal challenges, and it's on hold right now, and DOL is reevaluating. So just keep in mind that, somebody, the minimum they have to make to be considered exempt is $23,000, okay, or 23 something like that, okay? Another thing that's available for governmental entities is to pay compensatory time off instead of paying cash, okay? So you have the option as a GCD of offering your employees comp time instead of overtime pay. The thing that you have to be careful for is you can't skimp on the comp time. So it should be given at time and a half, just like overtime pay is time and a half. So if you have an employee that worked, 20 hours, and then you tell them, oh, you can have Friday off and comp time, well, you owe them more than that, because it really should be on a time and a half basis that they get the time off. So just make sure you're documenting that, and if you have somebody that's ends up having a day off every week, then maybe they're working too much overtime. And that's a final thing on this, is I would strongly recommend in your policy that you state they have to request overtime in advance, permission to work overtime in advance from you or whoever you want to put in charge of that, because you don't want to be surprised with somebody coming up and saying, oh, I worked 100 hours of overtime last month, so you owe me all this money, and you had no idea. So I would require prior approval unless it's some exigent circumstance. Okay, leave benefits. This is, of course, again, there's so much involved here, but a couple of things that I wanted to just mention is beware of local ordinances. Don't just look at what state and federal law requires, but in the city of Austin, we just had an ordinance passed a few months ago that requires private employers to give paid sick leave, okay? This hasn't been implemented yet. It's probably going to face some legal challenges, I would think, but you need to be aware of whatever locale you're in, if there's anything like that you're not aware of. What was I going to say on that? Something else, but I can't remember. But anyway, also the next area that causes people the most trouble in leave policies is the Family and Medical Leave Act. And this is something that provides employees with unpaid, job-protected leave for up to 12 weeks a year, okay? And so for governmental entities, it doesn't matter how many employees you have, your employees are eligible for this type of leave, and if they meet the requirements. So they have to have worked for you for a year, and then there's a number of hour requirements they have to have. But you just need to make sure that you're letting your employees know they're eligible for this. That it can be for the birth of a child or adoption of a child, if they have some kind of serious medical condition, or if they're taking care of somebody in their family that has a serious health condition. All these things can entitle them to up to 12 weeks a year of unpaid leave. I mean, you can choose to pay it if you're super generous, but you have to give it to them unpaid for sure. And just, this is kind of a big deal because you're actually required to post something in your workplace. I'll show you on the next slide. The Department of Labor has a poster that you can post in your workplace letting your employees know about this. But you just want to make sure that you're real open about it. You put it in your policy. It's going to take up a lot of space in your policy, I'm just telling you, because there's so many requirements to do with it that I'm not even touching on today. But you just need to, if somebody appears to be eligible, you kind of need to be proactive and let them know what their rights are, and don't try to hide like maybe they won't know that they can do this. You can't do that. You have to let them know. And then when they return from FMLA leave, they are entitled to get their same job back or an equivalent job with the same pay, benefits, etc. Okay, so that's the whole point of this is, people not leaving and coming back and, they have no job anymore. Okay, let's see. There's the poster. You can get that on the Department of Labor website, and I'll show you the resource slide for that in just a second. Okay. Final things are workplace violence. I would really recommend you address this. I'm not going to talk about the gun issue today because that could take a whole day. to talk about all that. This is just let your employees know that their safety is important to you, and that everyone knows what to do, okay? If they encounter somebody that's violent in the workplace, what are they supposed to do? If there are employees making threats, talking about, how many guns they have and they ought to bring them to work someday, things like that, you got to take them super seriously. And, things that we could have joked about a number of years ago, you just can't anymore. That's the world we're in. And so let your employees know they got to report stuff like that immediately. And then it's your responsibility to deal with it. Obviously, there are situations where you don't want employees to have to go through a process like call 911, those types of things. Use common sense. But your policy should lay out like what's prohibited conduct. Does that include damaging property? And then are you ready to take measures like discipline or even termination if somebody gets out of line? Okay, almost done. Okay, so again, Michael, his policy is if I had a gun with 2 bullets and I was in a room with Hitler and Bin Laden and Toby, I'd shoot Toby twice. So anyway, don't follow his example, but it is rather hysterical. Okay. Finally, complaint process, have that written out in your policy as well. How are people supposed to let you know that there is a problem? Are you going to make your employees follow chain of command and reporting? I strongly urge you to make sure that they know if the problem is with their immediate supervisor, like you're not going to force them to go complain to that person, okay? Really think through how you would handle the complaint process, and then let people know that you're investigating their complaint. Stay in touch with them. The worst thing you can do is act like you're blowing off somebody's complaint. Y'all know, you watch the news, right? You've got to take it really seriously and deal with it. And then complaints to the Texas Workforce Commission, they're the ones that handle discrimination and other types of employment lawsuits in Texas. Go on, their website's really good for information. So you don't need to put in your policy telling employees how to file a complaint against you. Okay, don't do that, but just for your sake, know that that's the avenue that they would go through, is to file a complaint with that agency. And then the worst thing that could happen is you end up in litigation, and nobody would want to have to face Dwight in a courtroom. So if you don't know who Dwight is, he's crazy, and that's the kind of employee you would not want to be suing you. So that's thank you, and let me know if you have any questions. Yes, Greg, or sorry.
Something that I really never knew. I'm in HR and HR management, utility industry, but something I never knew that when you do terminate someone, it doesn't keep them from being eligible for unemployment benefits.
Right.
So just know if you're going to terminate at will for whatever reason that you're prepared to pay them benefits.
That's true. You're not really free of the person.
Yeah, yeah. They will make decisions with the Workforce Commission where we had 2 different employees that were terminated for the same thing, time clock fraud. One was granted, one was not. So.
Well, okay. Thank you for making that point. Greg, yeah.
I'm going to be delicate about this.
Okay.
Employee A complains that employee B has pornography on their computer. Employee B says employee A must have planted it.
Oh, gosh.
What the hell do you do?
What do you do? Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where, you have to go through an investigation and interview the people. I don't know if you would go to the extreme of getting like a forensic person in there to look at who's been doing what on that computer. It depends on, what resources you have at your disposal, but really in that that's almost like a he said, she said in a way. You just have to investigate and then make a call based on your best judgment. And then whoever the loser is, you know, they can take you to court or they can file a complaint. But I don't know, I mean, there are gonna be situations like that.
Would you rather defend the district if they fired the person accused or the whistleblower?
Boy, you are really putting me on the spot.
I think the law is heavily in favor of the whistleblower. I think that's a much harder case to win.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, if you have to make that hard call,
Yeah.
look at what you're facing in court. Yeah, yeah, sir.
In your examples, you were showing talking about exempt and not exempt, and then we talked about the managers and then the comp time. But I took it, the exempt, which would be like a manager, would not be entitled to comp time too, or would that be a district policy? Or I'm just trying to make sure I got clear on what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's in a management role and they have a lot of discretion, I mean, they're probably going to be exempt
Yes.
from Fair Labor Standards Act.
No, I understand that, but would they be entitled to comp time?
Oh, well,
That's
no.
what I was
I mean, that would be in the discretion of the employer. I mean,
Okay.
for the most part, employers have a lot of discretion on how much leave they give people, if it's unpaid or paid, with the exceptions that I talked about. But in that case, no. When somebody's hired at a salary and they're told, this is the job, you don't have to give them comp time if they work
I
overtime.
understand. It was just when we jumped to the next thing, and I was like, okay. I wanna make sure
Yeah.
full
No, only comp time to those non-exempt folks. You have that option. Okay? Thank you. Thanks.
Let me get you introduce you to Ryan